The kitchen fires of Callista 3 burned with a light that never touched earth. Violet flames that cooked food into colors no human table had ever seen. Owen Garrett stood before those flames each night, his hands translating recipes his grandmother would not recognize into meals the colony's elite pretended to enjoy. But when a desperate alien mother carried her dying daughter through his door, rejecting every delicacy he prepared, Owen would reach for something he'd never served to aliens before, a dusty can from Earth that would shatter everything the galaxy believed about nourishment, power, and what it truly means to feed a child. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The restaurant hummed with the particular silence of wealth, pretending to enjoy itself. Crystalline chandeliers cast prisms across tables where Thessian nobles reclined, their skin shifting through gradients of blue and silver as they consumed Owen's carefully prepared dishes. He moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of a man who had learned to make art from desperation, plating fusion cuisine that married Earth technique with alien ingredients no human had tasted before the war ended badly. His daughter's picture watched him from a corner shelf, her smile frozen at age 7, before the illness, before the inadequate colony medicine, before the grave he visited each dawn. He cooked now because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant drowning. The dining room doors split open with a sound like ice cracking. Conversation died in concentric circles as a figure entered, tall even for a Thessian, her ceremonial robes torn at the hem, her chromatic skin flickering unstably between violet and ash gray. She carried a child against her chest, a girl no more than 5 or 6 in human years, whose skin had gone nearly transparent, veins visible like rivers on a fading map. Owen recognized desperation before he recognized rank. The woman moved like someone fleeing an execution, her eyes scanning the room for threats before settling on him with an intensity that made his pulse spike. She crossed the restaurant without acknowledging the stares, the whispers, the rising tide of scandal, and stopped at the kitchen threshold. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade drawn in a temple. "They say you can cook anything. Prove it. Save her." The child's breathing was shallow, her eyes half closed. Owen had seen this before, in the mirror, in his daughter's last days. He wiped his hands on his apron, feeling the weight of every parent's worst nightmare settle across his shoulders. "What has she eaten?" he asked. "Everything," the woman said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Everything, and she rejects it all." Owen cleared a preparation table with a sweep of his arm, sending garnishes and plating tools clattering to the floor. The woman laid her daughter down with the tenderness of someone handling broken glass. Up close, the child looked worse than dying. She looked like she was fading, her body rejecting existence itself. "What's her name?" Owen asked, already pulling ingredients from the cooling units. "Caviar," the woman whispered. "I am Thessara. We have nowhere else to go." The dining room had emptied within moments, nobles fleeing the scandal of a disgraced family seeking help from a human. Owen barely noticed. He was already working, his hands moving through muscle memory older than grief. He prepared a delicate broth infused with healing kelps from Thessian waters, the kind served to their sick for generations. Caviar turned her head away before the spoon reached her lips. He tried again. Soft protein cultivated in the orbital farms, seasoned with minerals that supported Thessian cellular structure. The child's throat worked, she swallowed, and within seconds her body convulsed, rejecting it violently. Thessara held her daughter as she retched, her own face a mask of controlled terror. Owen moved faster. He prepared grain pastes, vegetable purees, fruit nectars, each one crafted with precision that would have earned him accolades in any kitchen on Earth or beyond. Caviar refused them all. The few she managed to swallow came back up, leaving her weaker each time. The violet flames cast shadows that made her transparency look like a prophecy fulfilling itself. Hours blurred together. Owen's sous chef, a young Thessian named Oren who'd stayed when the others fled, assisted in silence, his chromatic skin dim with worry. They moved through every category of Thessian cuisine, then branched into other colony species, searching for something, anything the child's body might accept. Dawn light began filtering through the restaurant's tall windows, cold and blue. Caviar had stopped opening her eyes. Her breathing had become something between a whisper and a prayer. Thessara knelt beside the table, one hand on her daughter's chest, feeling for the heartbeat that grew fainter with each moment. Owen stood in the center of his kitchen, surrounded by dozens of untouched dishes, and felt the familiar weight of helplessness crushing down. He'd felt it before, in another hospital, with another child, when all his skill and desperation had meant nothing against biology and fate. His gaze fell on the storage room door, on the personal locker where he kept the few things he'd carried from Earth. Things he never served to customers. Things that reminded him of a world and a life that no longer existed. Thessara looked up at him, and in her alien eyes, he saw a reflection of his own worst night. "Please," she said, and the word contained every parent's last impossible hope. Owen walked to the storage room. His hands were shaking. The storage locker opened with a hiss that sounded like a sigh. Inside, nestled among vacuum-sealed packets of earth spices and a few books he could not bear to leave behind, sat a row of cans, relics from a world that felt more like a dream each year. Owen's fingers traced labels he'd read 1,000 times in moments of homesickness: chicken noodle soup, baked beans, fruit cocktail. And there, pushed to the back as if hiding from the present, a single can with a cheerful orange circle logo: SpaghettiOs. He'd bought it the day before the colony transport left Earth, thinking his daughter might want something familiar during the journey. She'd never gotten the chance to eat it. The can had followed him through the war, through her death, through every kitchen he'd worked since. He'd kept it not as food, but as a monument to ordinary days that would never come again. Owen pulled it free, feeling its weight like an accusation. Serving this to a Thessian noble's child felt like madness. It was processed, simple, the kind of food wealthy colonists mocked as primitive human sustenance. But Caviar was dying, and nothing left to lose except a memory he'd been clutching too tightly. He returned to the kitchen. Oren's eyes widened when he saw the can. "Chef, I know what it is," Owen said quietly. He opened it with hands steadier than they should have been. The smell hit him first. Tomato and wheat, and something manufactured that smelled exactly like childhood, like his grandmother's kitchen on rainy afternoons, like the before. He poured the contents into a small ceramic bowl, not bothering to heat it. There was no time for ceremony. Thessara watched him approach with something between confusion and fury building in her expression. She saw the humble bowl, the ring-shaped pasta floating in orange sauce, and her skin flashed crimson. "You mock us now? You offer my daughter human scraps?" "I'm offering her what I have left," Owen said, and knelt beside Caviar. The child's eyes fluttered open, drawn by some instinct deeper than consciousness. Owen lifted a single SpaghettiO on a spoon, the sauce dripping back into the bowl like liquid sunlight. He held it to her lips, expecting nothing, hoping for everything. Caviar's mouth opened. The pasta touched her tongue. And something extraordinary happened. Her skin brightened, the transparency reversing like a tide pulling back from shore. Color flooded through her veins, not the shifting chromatic display of healthy Thessians, but something warmer, more stable. She swallowed, and her whole body seemed to sigh with relief. Her hand, which had been limp against the table, rose to grasp Owen's wrist. She pulled the spoon closer, took another bite, then another. Within moments she was sitting up, reaching for the bowl, eating with a hunger that looked like joy. The restaurant, empty except for them, held its breath as a dying child devoured a can of SpaghettiOs and came back to life. Thessara stumbled backward, her hand pressed against the wall as if the floor had become unstable. Her daughter sat upright now, the bowl cradled, and in both hands, her skin glowing with a warmth that looked almost human. The child was eating with single-minded focus, each ring of pasta disappearing like a small miracle, and her mother watched as though witnessing something holy and horrifying in equal measure. Owen stood slowly, giving them space. Oren had moved to the kitchen doorway, his chromatic skin flickering between colors that signaled confusion and awe in Thessian physiology. The dawn light strengthened through the windows, painting everything in shades of blue and gold. "How?" Thessara's voice came out broken. "How does this work when nothing else could?" "I don't know," Owen admitted, "but she's eating. That's what matters." Thessara shook her head, and the movement looked like something tearing inside her. "You don't understand. You can't understand." She pressed both palms against her face, a gesture so human it startled him. "My daughter is dying because of what we are, because of what we've done." Caviar looked up, from her bowl, tomato sauce at the corners of her mouth, and reached for her mother. Thessara knelt and pulled her close, holding her as if she might disappear. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of secrets too heavy to carry alone anymore. "I am not just another noble. I am Thessara Velven, sister to the High Executor, blood of the planetary governor himself." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Or I was, until I refused to celebrate our latest conquest, until I spoke against the cultural protocols, the systematic erasure of every species we absorb. They exiled me for calling it what it is, genocide dressed in silk." Owen felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd known the Thessians were conquerors, everyone in the colony knew, but hearing it spoken aloud by one of their own nobility gave it a different weight. "Caviar started getting sick 3 months after my exile," Thessara continued. "The physicians called it rejection syndrome. They said her body was attacking, in itself, that her cells couldn't maintain cohesion. But I knew the truth. She wasn't rejecting her body. She was rejecting the lies." She looked up at Owen, her eyes the color of deep water. "We feed our children supremacy with their first meal. We teach them that conquest is nourishment, that dominance is strength, that the suffering of others is the price of our greatness. And Caviar," her voice broke, "Caviar's body knew it was poison. She's dying because she can't swallow our cruelty anymore." Caviar finished the last of the SpaghettiOs and set the bowl down gently. She looked at Owen with eyes that seemed older than they should be, and when she spoke, her voice was small but clear. "It tasted like truth," she said. Outside, the colony was waking, and somewhere in those waking streets, other children were learning to starve on lies. The second child arrived at dusk 3 days later. Owen was closing the kitchen, scrubbing down the violet flames that never fully extinguished, when he heard the knock. Not the confident rap of a paying customer, but the desperate percussion of someone who'd run out of options. He opened the door to find a Thessian father holding a boy whose skin had gone the color of old ash. "I heard about Caviar," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I heard what you did." Owen let them in. The boy's name was Torin, and he'd been sick for 6 months. His father had spent a fortune on physicians, healers, dietary specialists. Nothing worked. Torin ate less each day, his body rejecting every traditional meal with increasing violence. Owen prepared another bowl of SpaghettiOs, rationing from his limited supply, and watched the same miracle repeat itself. Color, breath, life returning with each ring-shaped bite. The father wept openly, something Thessian men rarely did in public. He pressed payment into Owen's hands, a small fortune in colony credits. Owen tried to refuse, but the man insisted. "Buy more," he said. "Buy whatever you need. There are others." He was right. Within a week, they came in shadows and silence. Families who couldn't risk being seen seeking help from a human. Parents carrying children in various stages of fading, their transparency marking them as victims of something the Thessian medical establishment refused to acknowledge. Owen served them from his dwindling earth supplies: canned soup, crackers, peanut butter on soft bread, macaroni and cheese from powder packets. Simple foods, honest foods, meals that carried no weight of conquest or superiority. Every child improved, every single one. Oren helped where he could, learning to open cans and warm soup with a reverence that transformed the acts into something sacred. "It's not the ingredients," he said one night, watching a young girl devour chicken noodle soup. It's what they represent. Food made without cruelty. Meals that don't demand anyone else suffer for them to exist. Owen understood then what he'd stumbled into. The rejection syndrome wasn't medical, it was moral. These children, sensitive in ways their culture had tried to breed out, were dying because they'd been fed a diet of lies so fundamental that their bodies couldn't process it. They were starving not from lack of nutrition, but from poisoned meaning. Every meal prepared according to Thessian tradition carried the invisible weight of conquest, the unspoken message that their survival required someone else's subjugation. His earth food, simple and unpretentious, carried no such burden. It was just sustenance, honest and uncomplicated, asking nothing except to nourish whoever ate it. But his supplies were running out. The last cans sat in the storage room like an accusation, and more families knocked at his door each night. Owen stood in his kitchen at midnight, doing mathematics that didn't add up. 30 children saved, maybe 50 more coming. Not enough food left to feed them all. He was trying to save dying children with the last remnants of a dead world, and somewhere in the colony's glittering towers, the planetary governor slept soundly, unaware that his own daughter had just started refusing food. They came at dawn, when the violet light made their armor look like liquid shadow. 12 enforcers led by Commander Jael, a Thessian built like a siege weapon, his chromatic skin locked in the red-black of official violence. They moved through the restaurant's front entrance with the confidence of those who'd never been told no, their energy weapons humming at low charge, enough to terrify without killing. Owen stood in the kitchen doorway, his hands still wet from washing the morning's dishes. Oren had frozen mid-motion, a bowl of soup balanced in his grip. In the dining room, hastily converted to a makeshift healing ward. 17 children and their families looked up with the particular terror of people who'd been caught doing something their society considered shameful. Owen Garrett. Zael's voice rolled through the space, like thunder over stone. You are charged with distributing contaminated substances, operating an unlicensed medical facility, and conspiracy to undermine Thessian cultural health protocols. He gestured, and 4 enforcers moved toward the families. These civilians will be detained for enabling human interference in Thessian biological matters. A mother clutched her daughter closer. The girl, maybe 8 years old, had been eating saltine crackers with jam when the enforcers arrived. Her skin had regained its glow just 2 days prior, after months of fading toward transparency. She buried her face in her mother's shoulder, and Owen saw the woman's skin flash through colors that meant she was preparing to fight, to die if necessary, before letting them take her child. Wait. The word came from the back of the dining room. A father stood, his son tucked behind him. Commander Jael, does your daughter still refuse to eat? The restaurant went utterly silent. Jael's armor seemed to constrict around him, his weapon hand twitching. What did you say? Your daughter, Mira? She's sick, isn't she? Rejection syndrome. 3 months now, maybe 4. The father's voice shook but held steady. My sister works in the medical tower. She sees the appointment records. Half the enforcement division has children exhibiting symptoms. Another parent stood. Then another. They spoke in overlapping whispers, creating a map of sickness that spread through the colony's elite like a web. Magistrate Corin's twin boys. Senator Velas's youngest. The High Executor's own daughter, Lyris, whose illness was supposedly classified but had become the worst-kept secret in the administrative district. Jael's weapon lowered a fraction. His gaze swept the children in the dining room, noting their healthy coloring, their bright eyes, their obvious improvement. One of his enforcers, a younger female, stepped forward. Her voice was barely audible. Commander, my nephew is dying. If there's something here that works, it's human food. Zael spat the words like they burned. Primitive, processed garbage. It's not medicine. It saved my son's life, a mother said simply. And my daughter, said another. Mine too. The testimonies rippled through the room. Jael stood in the center of it, surrounded by evidence that contradicted everything he'd been sent to destroy. His enforcers lowered their weapons one by one, not in surrender but in recognition. They'd come to raid a criminal operation. Instead, they'd found their own family's last hope. Giles' skin flickered through 12 colors in as many seconds, an internal war playing out in bioluminescent detail. Finally, he looked at Owen. "Show me," he said. The summons arrived before noon, delivered by a courier whose skin maintained the pure silver of the governor's personal staff. A single card, black as void, embossed with the three-moon seal of High Executor Venn. Owen was to present himself at the planetary seat before sunset. Alone, the word request appeared nowhere in the text. Commander Ziel had left with his enforcers 2 hours earlier, taking nothing, arresting no one. He'd watched Owen prepare a bowl of tomato soup for the young enforcer's nephew, observed the child's immediate improvement, and departed in silence that felt heavier than any threat. Owen knew what silence like that meant. The commander was making a report, and that report would reach the governor before Owen finished cleaning his kitchen. Oren helped him dress in the closest thing he owned to formal wear, a chef's jacket he'd kept pristine for occasions that never came. "You don't have to go," the young Thessian said, his skin flickering with anxiety. "You could leave the colony. Take a transport to the outer settlements." "And leave the children?" Owen shook his head. "Besides, running would just confirm whatever he wants to believe about me." The planetary seat rose from Callista III's capital like a crystal grown from frozen lightning, its towers catching the triple sunset and throwing it back in colors that hurt to witness. Owen had never been inside, had never expected to be. Humans didn't receive invitations to the administrative heart of Thessian power. They received work permits, residency restrictions, and polite suggestions to remain invisible. The interior defied description. Walls of living glass showed scenes from across the colony's territories, some real-time, others historical, all demonstrating the scope of Thessian reach. Owen walked corridors wider than his entire restaurant, past galleries displaying artifacts from conquered worlds, evidence of cultural absorption presented as celebration rather than theft. They led him to a private chamber, smaller than he'd expected, almost intimate. High Executor Venn stood with his back to the door, facing a window that overlooked the colony's sprawling districts. He was tall, even for his species, his chromatic skin locked in the deep blue of absolute authority. When he turned, Owen saw his daughter's eyes reflected in the father's face. "My sister spoke well of you once," Venn said without preamble. "Before her exile. She said you cooked with honesty, whatever that meant." He gestured to a table where a meal sat untouched, recognizably Thessian delicacies prepared with masterful technique. "My daughter will not eat. The best physicians in 9 systems tell me her condition is genetic, neurological, untreatable. They lie, of course. They lie because the truth is unacceptable." He moved to a side chamber and opened the door. Inside, on a bed that floated on gravity suspension, lay a child of perhaps 10 years. Lyris. Her skin had gone so transparent that Owen could see the slow pulse of her circulatory system, watch her heart laboring like something drowning. She was further gone than any child he'd seen, days from complete dissolution. "Cure her," Venn said, "and I will give you anything. Wealth, status, a seat on the colonial council. Your people could have citizenship, real citizenship, not this provisional existence." He paused, and his voice dropped to something almost human. "Or refuse, and I will erase you. Your restaurant, your reputation, every trace that you existed. I will scatter the families you've helped and make certain no child ever seeks your aid again." Owen looked at the dying girl, then at her father. "What you're asking for isn't a cure. It's a revolution." "I'm asking you to save my daughter," Venn said. And for the first time, the absolute authority cracked. "Everything else is negotiable." Owen requested 3 things: his own tools, privacy while he cooked, and an audience. Venn agreed to the first 2 immediately. The third made his skin flash through colors that meant dangerous consideration. "An audience will make this political," the governor said. "It already is." Owen replied. Your daughter's illness is political. Hiding her cure will be political. The only choice is whether we're honest about it. 2 hours later, the governor's crystalline reception hall filled with the colony's most powerful families. Magistrates, military commanders, economic ministers, all summoned on short notice with no explanation. They arrived expecting emergency legislation or war declarations, not the sight of a human chef setting up a cooking station in the center of the hall. Owen worked with the calm of someone past fear. He'd brought almost nothing, a single pot, a wooden spoon his grandmother had given him, and the last 3 cans from his storage room, chicken noodle soup, a can of peaches, and 1 final container of SpaghettiOs. The audience watched with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt as he opened the cans with a manual opener, the sound of metal on metal echoing through the vast chamber. He poured the soup into the pot and set it over a simple heating element, refusing the elaborate Thessian cooking apparatus offered to him. While it warmed, he opened the peaches and arranged them in a small bowl. The SpaghettiOs he left sealed, a reserve he hoped he wouldn't need. Then carried Lyris into the hall himself, wrapped in blankets that couldn't hide how close to disappearing she'd become. The audience gasped, many seeing the governor's daughter's condition for the first time. Some turned away, unable to witness the transparency that made her look more like a ghost than a child. Owen ladled soup into a ceramic bowl, added 2 slices of earth bread he'd bartered a week's wages for, and approached. He knelt before Lyris, meeting her half-closed eyes. This is going to taste different than anything you've had before, he said quietly. It's not fancy. It's not made from rare ingredients or prepared with complex techniques. It's just food, honest food, made by people who wanted to feed their families something warm. He lifted the spoon to her lips. She turned her head away, the reflex of someone whose body had learned to reject everything. Owen waited, patient as stone, until her eyes focused on him again. Your Aunt Thessara's daughter ate this. So did dozens of other children. They all got better. Not because it's magic, but because it doesn't ask you to swallow lies along with nutrition. Lyris's lips parted. The soup touched her tongue, and the hall held its breath as she swallowed. Then again, color bloomed through her transparency like sunrise through fog, and she reached for the bowl with hands that had been too weak to lift themselves moments before. Owen stood and faced the audience. Your children are dying because you're feeding them conquest, disguised as culture. They're starving on your supremacy. The hall erupted in chaos. Magistrates rose from their seats, skin flashing red with outrage. Military commanders shouted over each other, their voices creating a cacophony that rattled the crystalline walls. A senator demanded Owen's immediate arrest. Another called for his execution. The audience dissolved into factional shouting, each voice trying to drown out the truth that had just been spoken. Ven raised his hand, and silence fell like a guillotine blade. His daughter sat in his arms, eating soup with steady hands, her skin growing more solid with each spoonful. The evidence was irrefutable, sitting in plain sight, getting healthier while they watched. Let him finish, Ven said quietly. Owen had expected anger, even violence. He hadn't expected what happened next. From the back of the hall, a small figure stood. A child, no more than 8 years old, her skin still carrying the faint transparency of recent illness. Owen recognized her as one of the first he'd helped. The daughter of a logistics coordinator who'd risked everything to bring her to his restaurant. May I speak? Her voice was small but clear in the silence. Her father tried to pull her down, his skin flashing through colors of fear and warning. But Ven nodded once, and the child walked to the center of the hall, stopping beside Owen. She looked up at the assembled power of the colony and spoke with the devastating honesty only children possess. When I was sick, everything tasted like anger. The food was beautiful, and it tasted like anger. My mother said it was medicine, but it felt like I was swallowing someone else's pain every time I ate. I got sicker because I didn't want to swallow pain anymore. Another child stood, then another. They moved to the center without coordination, drawn by recognition of shared experience. A boy with military insignia on his family robe spoke next. "The physicians told my father I was weak, that I wasn't strong enough to be Thessian, but I wasn't weak. I was just tired of pretending that hurting others made us strong." A girl whose family seal marked her as judicial nobility stepped forward. "I dreamed about the people we conquered. I saw their faces in my food. I couldn't eat because I knew what we'd taken from them to put meals on our tables." One by one, the children testified. They spoke about the weight of cultural lies, about knowing in their bones that conquest was wrong even when every adult told them it was right. They described the exhaustion of performing superiority, the soul-deep revulsion at celebrating dominance, the slow starvation that came from refusing to digest their society's foundational cruelties. Their parents listened with expressions that cycled through denial, recognition, shame, and finally something that looked like grief for childhoods they'd stolen in the name of cultural pride. The children's words accomplished what no rebellion could. They made the powerful see themselves clearly, reflected in the eyes of those they'd harmed most. The seasons turned on Callista 3, and with them, the colony transformed in ways both visible and subtle. Owen's restaurant didn't expand in size, but its purpose shifted like a planet finding new orbit. The tables that once served Thessian delicacies to pretentious nobles now held a different kind of gathering. Families ate together, human and Thessian, sharing meals that carried no weight beyond nourishment. The menu changed. Owen still cooked with the technique that had made his reputation, but now he prepared humble foods with the same care he'd once reserved for rare delicacies. Grilled cheese sandwiches made with bread. Thessian bakers learned to craft using earth wheat. Tomato soup simmered in pots tended by cooks from 3 different species. And yes, occasionally, SpaghettiOs, though now they came from a manufacturing facility Venn had commissioned, reverse-engineered from Owen's remaining cans and produced with quality controls that would have made his grandmother proud. Thessara worked beside him most days, her exile quietly revoked through bureaucratic channels that pretended it had never happened. Caviar helped where she could, her laughter filling the kitchen like a bell that had finally learned its proper tone. She was healthy now, vibrant, her skin cycling through colors that reflected genuine emotion rather than performed supremacy. Venn visited every week, always with Lyris, never with his official entourage. He ate simple meals at corner tables and listened to other families' conversations with the attention of someone learning a language he'd forgotten he'd once known. His daughter was thriving, her transparency reversed, her body accepting nourishment, now that it came without poisoned meaning. The enforcement divisions underwent quiet restructuring. Commander Zael headed a new initiative reviewing cultural protocols, dismantling policies that had codified conquest as virtue. It was slow work, bureaucratic and frustrating, but it moved forward with the inevitability of a tide that had finally turned. The children who'd testified became something unexpected. Teachers. They spoke in schools, in administrative halls, in military academies. They told their stories with the authority of those who nearly died for truth and chose to live for it instead. A new generation learned that strength without compassion was just cruelty with better posture. Owen stood in his kitchen one evening, watching the dining room fill with the usual crowd, a Thessian grandmother teaching her grandson to eat macaroni and cheese with a spoon. A human family sharing a table with their Thessian neighbors, comparing notes on recipes. Oren training 2 new cooks, 1 human, 1 Thessian, in the art of preparing food that nourished body and spirit equally. The violet flames still burned in his kitchen, but they felt warmer now, less alien. Owen plated a simple meal, chicken and vegetables over rice, and carried it to a family celebrating their daughter's recovery. The girl smiled at him with eyes that held no shadows, no weight beyond childhood's natural joy. Outside, the triple sunset painted the colony in colors that belonged to everyone. And in that light, one human chef proved that revolution sometimes comes not with fire, but with the quiet courage to feed the truth.